you feeling alone? Has COVID isolated you? Do you feel alone maybe because other people aren't understanding where you're coming from? They don't understand the struggles that you may be feeling or facing? Do you feel desperate? Do you feel like that this world's collapsing in on you and you just need to escape desperately for some reason? And then are you afraid? Are you afraid of the future? Are you afraid of getting COVID? Are you afraid of financially whether or not this pandemic will affect our country to such a degree that it will impact you economically? There are a lot of reasons to be afraid. And generally, when we do feel afraid, we feel alone. We sense that nobody else understands what we're going through. And oftentimes, the fear in our lives leads to desperation. Psalm 56 speaks of this, and it's penned by David. And it was penned during a time where David was going through some very challenging times in his life. As we understand, he was running for his life, and he of all places ran to his enemies, the Philistines, and ended up in the city of Gath, and that's the hometown of Goliath. You know, that giant, who he killed. Not a great place, I wouldn't think, to run to. But anyway, that's where David was, and it turns out that they figured out who he was, and he had himself in a tough circumstance. But in the middle of that, as he struggled with it and struggled with the emotions of people against him and the trials of life, there's this theme of putting his trust in the Lord. In this psalm twice, first of all in verses 4 and 5, and then in 10 and 11, we see very similar words. The first is this: when I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God whose word I praise. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? And then the end of verse 9 through 11, this I know, that God is for me. In God whose word I praise. In the Lord whose word I praise. In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? You notice again that he's praising the Word of God. His trust and his connection is connected through the promises of God. And he praises the promises of God because he knows they are trustworthy and true. And it is God in whom he trusts. Not his power, not his own intellect, not even his own strength as a warrior. David had already won some battles. He was a pretty fierce guy. But in the midst of it, as strong and as capable as he was in this place of fear. And I believe God took him to that place of fear so that God could remind him where his true source of strength really was. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. You know, this psalm reminds me of a song that was sung by Steve Green on a children's album. I'm going way back here because my son would play it in his old Fisher-Price cassette player. And it'd go, when I am afraid, I will trust in you, I will trust in you, I will trust in you. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. You see, God promises to watch over us. God promises to take care of his children. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, then you are his son or his daughter. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you have been declared as loved. You've been declared as righteous. You've been declared as one who is taken care of and watched over. You're one of his children, and you can boldly come into his throne of grace any time. So as you are here today, what is it that you're afraid of? And I want you to pause and be very honest. What is it that you're afraid of? And then once you identify it, can you take your eyes off of whatever that is, whether it's financial, political, or your health, or relational? Pause for a moment and remember the promises of God. Praise the promises of God. And then say to yourself, sing to yourself if it would help, when I am afraid, and matter of fact, Lord, I'm afraid right now, I put my trust in you, in God whose word I praise. In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? That is really good news. I'm Bob Warner, and I'd like you to think about that.